Welcome, young scholars. In this video, we will be discussing the Paleolithic Era, a period representing about 95% of human existence, from 200,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. Now, the big questions you need to answer after watching this video are: 1. How did humans spread out and take over the world during the Paleolithic Era? And 2. What advances did humans make during the Paleolithic Era? So the first question again, how did humans spread out and take over the world during the Paleolithic Era? So first we need to understand and define the term Paleolithic Era. So the Paleolithic Era represents the period of human development when humans relied upon and used primitive stone tools. Now the word Paleolithic actually derives from two Greek roots, paleo meaning old and lithos meaning stone, and that is why this period is also known as the Old Stone Age. Now do you think stone tools were the only tools invented and used by human beings during this period? No, as we will find out later, early humans relied on a number of other tools. However, most of those other tools, like spears, would deteriorate over time, while stone tools can still be used and can still be seen and studied today. Stone tools used by early humans were blunt, crude instruments used mostly for killing and removing flesh off the bones of dead animals. Now, as I mentioned before, this period lasted from around 200,000 BCE to around 10,000 years ago, which represents about 95% of human existence. Now, one of the challenges to studying this period of prehistory is that it's obviously before written records existed. So if you were an archaeologist, what type of evidence would you study to understand how humans lived during the Paleolithic era? Really, archaeologists study 5 different types of evidence. 1, they study the bones of early humans and animals that they hunted. These bones can tell us a lot about the age, health of early humans, and also the bones of animals can tell us a lot about the diet they had. Archaeologists also study the remains of tools that were used, including the stone tools we described earlier. Archaeologists also study the art that was created during this period. Now, the subject matter of these pieces at the beginning of the period oftentimes focus more on cave drawings or small objects such as the one shown here that depicted animals. Over time, humans began depicting supernatural images, suggesting some early forms of religion. Archaeologists can also learn a lot by studying the few modern hunter-gathering societies that still exist. Studying these tribes can tell us a lot about the lifestyle and social structure of hunting and gathering societies. And finally, archaeologists study modern DNA evidence, which can show patterns of human migration. Now, the archaeological record shows that the first humans, or Homo sapiens, evolved in East Africa near modern Ethiopia around 160,000 years ago. From there, humans inhabited other parts of Africa, and this sometimes is referred to as the out of Africa theory, a good name because obviously humans were first forming and deriving in Africa, and then eventually around 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens left Africa, venturing to other parts of Eurasia, where they came in contact with other hominid species like the Neanderthal. Now, human remains have been found in Australia dating to around 50,000 years ago, and this suggests that humans made it to Australia around the time of the last ice age, and most likely developed boats in order to reach the island of Australia. Humans then spread out across Eurasia, and then during the last ice age, bands of hunter-gatherers most likely crossed over the Bering Ice Bridge, which connected modern-day Russia and Alaska. Now, this bridge would eventually disappear with the end of the last ice age, leaving peoples of both hemispheres cut off from one another for thousands of years. The people of the Americas quickly spread south, inhabiting what was today the modern United States and also Latin America. So why were humans so successful in spreading out and taking over the whole world during this period? First, humans had the advantage of language and collective knowledge, which allowed them to adapt to nearly every single environment they came in contact with on Earth. These skills allowed humans not only to survive, but also to thrive at the time of the last ice age. And this can explain some of the biological differences that currently exist among human beings. So again, humans survived the last ice age, which ended most likely around 11,000 years ago. Now, during the Paleolithic period, all peoples worldwide lived as hunter-gatherers. In other words, all humans hunted wild animals, gathered wild edible plants, and we know this partly from the art that exists that depicts similar lifestyles. So some of that art can be found, some of that Paleolithic art can be found in France, but very similar drawings of hunting and gathering lifestyle can be seen in cave paintings in Chad. So again, hunter-gatherers are people who hunt wild animals, gather edible plants for their living. Now, hunter-gatherers are nomadic. They move seasonally following food supplies. They oftentimes move in very intentional patterns, depending on where the food supply is at any given time. Now, in terms of their social structures, hunter-gatherers tend to live in small bands of around 20 to 50 people. Most of these are kinship or family groups of relatives. Now, contrary to some other animal species that are born and basically tell their parents, "I'm out of here, I'll see you later," like horses, which can get up and start galloping at birth, human babies are highly dependent on their parents. Now, with two young kids myself, I know this all too well, having changed quite a few diapers. Now, humans are born at a much earlier state of brain development due to the size limits of the mother's womb and the birth canal. This meant that family and kinship groups became super important characteristics for the human species. Now, men and women in hunting and gathering societies tended to be relatively equal, or another word for that is egalitarian. Both had important roles in bringing in food for survival. Women tended to do most of the gathering, while men tended to do most of the hunting. In modern hunting and gathering societies, men and women contribute a similar number of calories, with women oftentimes bringing in more calories to the diet of a given hunting and gathering band. Now, in modern hunting and gathering societies as well, men oftentimes are more active in child caretaking, suggestive that the women's role in as child caretakers, as the primary child caretakers, is more of a social rather than biological condition. Now, speaking of childcare, kids in hunting and gathering societies are quite a burden. Having to constantly move makes it difficult to raise children, as you can see in this image with this woman is having to carry around her child strapped to her head. Consequently, the population of human Paleolithic societies and human societies in general tended to be relatively small during the Paleolithic era. Now, turning to the next big question, what advances did humans make in the Paleolithic era? So during the Paleolithic era, humans developed a number of important advancements. First, they developed the capacity to create art or jewelry. They engaged in symbolic communication. So we see this with seashells with certain holes, which depicts jewelry, which would have been created potentially to show variations in social standing and social status. Humans also developed burial ritual practices, which is suggestive of religion, because that indicates that there may have been some belief in an afterlife or some supernatural scenario after life. They also developed a number of specialized tools. Over time, those stone tools, which started out as kind of blunt, crude instruments, became smaller and sharper and more precise over time. And most importantly, they developed and utilized fire for a number of different activities, including obviously staying warm and for cooking meat and other food. Now, a final little question to think about. One of the interesting artifacts that remains that have been found from Paleolithic societies are these various Venus figurines that are found at different locations across Eurasia. So we see these various figurines. Now, what does this suggest about the Paleolithic era? If we can take a map of these various Venus figurines, where they've been located, we find these all across parts of Europe and into Eurasia, into Asia. Now, what does this suggest? The fact that there's many of these suggests, one, that at a minimum, the people in these different hunting and gathering bands were certainly communicating with one another. It might be indicative of possible trade that trade networks that started to early trade networks that started to form, in which this was a good or an item that was being exchanged. Certainly, it's suggestive of the creation of art. The function in which these particular items played. Were they religious in their purpose? These oftentimes are known as a mother goddess or a Venus figurine, suggestive that fertility was a very important characteristic in these societies. And so that might suggest something about gender roles, that women actually had greater society. Whenever you're talking about societies that worship some female deity rather than a male deity, it's suggestive or indicative of different gender roles than maybe we currently have in our society. All right, so that does it for this particular video. So by this time, you should again be able to answer those big questions of how did humans spread out and take over the world during the Paleolithic era, and what advances did humans make during the Paleolithic era. We will be discussing the Paleolithic era, a period representing about 95% of human existence, from 200,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. Now, the big questions you need to answer after watching this video are: 1. How did humans spread out and take over the world during the Paleolithic era? And 2. What advances did humans make during the Paleolithic era? Tools like spears would deteriorate over time, while stone tools can still be used and can still be seen and studied today. Stone tools used by early humans were blunt, crude instruments used mostly for killing and removing flesh off the bones of dead animals. Now, as I mentioned before, this period lasted from around 200,000 BCE, meaning old, and lithos, meaning stone, and that is why this period is also known as the Old Stone Age. Now, do you think stone tools were the only tools invented and used by human beings during this period? No, as we will find out later, early humans relied on a number of other tools. However, most of those other... So the first question again, how did humans spread out and take over the world during the Paleolithic era? So first we need to understand and define the term Paleolithic era. So the Paleolithic era represents the period of human development when humans relied upon and used primitive stone tools. Now the word Paleolithic actually derives from two Greek roots. Paleo Welcome, young scholars. In this video